Okay, so let's tackle Rostow's stages of development. Now, Rostow was the first academic to really try and come up with a model to explain why we have global inequality: developing countries, emerging countries, and developed countries. Now, he believed that all countries were on the same path, but some were further along that path than the others. So he came up with this model. Now, it's a bit of a line graph. So again, at the bottom, we have time, and then we have development. You know, if you look here, we've got kind of your developing countries, your emerging countries, and your developed countries. And the first of his 5 stages was the traditional society. These are, we don't really have too many of these societies left anymore. Most countries have developed past this. But if they do exist, they're in sub-Saharan Africa, okay? Now, with a traditional society, the main source of employment is subsistence agriculture. That means that you only make enough food to survive and feed your family. You don't even have enough to sell. So at this point, most people don't even have any income. They are literally just living off the land, and gender roles are kind of very traditional. Women stays at home with the kids. Husband goes and works in the farm. Birth rate tends to be very high, but so is your death rate as well, because there's just a lack of health care. So people get sick, they just simply die. Again, repeating this, we don't really have too many of these countries left, which is, a good thing. However, as they develop, we start to see progress. Now, this is what Rostow believes is the most important stage of development. He calls this the preconditions for takeoff. Now, what does that really mean? If I'm thinking pre-takeoff, think about if you're on a plane and you're on the runway and you're about to take off. You're not moving very fast, but you're getting ready to do so, okay? Now, what these preconditions mean is that governments are starting to deal with corruption. They're starting to spend money better. Maybe they're building roads. Maybe they're building electrical pylons to get electricity across all of your country. They're building kind of airports and ports. All of this is getting ready for economic activity to start to happen. So Rostow believed that this was the most important stage. If you couldn't do that, then you had no chance. But once you've done that, what you're going to see is rapid change. And we can see here we've moved from your developing countries up towards your emerging countries. Now, what happens next? Well, industrialization takes place. We have takeoff. Now, takeoff is just a different way of saying industrialization. You should know what industrialization is. It comes up again and again throughout the course. We're seeing, if we can link to the Clark-Fisher model, check that video if you haven't seen it, an increase in secondary employment, huge amounts of rural to urban migration. People start leaving their subsistence farming jobs in the countryside and they go to factories where they can earn a better wage and work less hard. At this point, those factories are making lots of products that can be shipped overseas and sold. So now your country has just a little bit of income. This is where China was 30, 40 years ago. Okay, and look how quickly it's changed. Okay? So, next, once you've done your industrialization, once you've done your takeoff, you start to see this kind of in between. It's almost in between emerging and developed. We call it drive to maturity. Now, what happens in drive to maturity? Your exports, this is me exporting to other countries, really start to increase. You have more and more products that you start to sell, okay? South Korea is not really this anymore, but it used to be. Like, Korea started to create companies that people wanted to buy from, kind of Sony, Samsung. Suddenly they were developing these new technologies that people actually wanted, and people started to pay. So they are exporting, and coming in is money. Okay? Coming back is money, which means there's more taxes, there's higher wages. And this allows further development. You can invest in more factories, you can invest in more roads, you can invest in more hospitals and education to improve the quality of life for people that live there, and also make sure they have more skills to do better work and get paid even more. And then finally, you make your jump to the promised land, where everyone's trying to get to. Your classic high income, highly developed countries, we call these high mass consumption countries. And you think, okay, well, what's a high mass consumption? What consumption means to consume things, right? To use them. And this is where everybody's got loads of money. Not everybody. There is still some inequality inside your country. But everyone has a thing called disposable income. Disposable income is what's left after you've paid the tax man, after you've paid for your accommodation. This is the money that you go on Amazon and you shop with. This is the money that you go on Shein and buy a new outfit to wear once and then throw in the bin. Okay? Most people are now working in tertiary jobs. So they're working in services. They're working as doctors, lawyers. They work in advertisement, banking, insurance, teachers, university professors. Okay, they're not working in factories. Most of the factories have closed. This is deindustrialization. And like I say, people have that disposable income to throw around. Yep, no one is dying of starvation. There's long life expectancy because if you get sick, you go to a very good hospital. Okay? And so Rostow said, everybody just chill. Just be patient. We're all on the path, but some of us are at different points to each other. Okay, and we just need to relax. Those countries in sub-Saharan Africa that are traditional society today, they just need to carry on their journey and they will be fine. Now, this does help us understand the world for sure. Like, if you look at Asia, Southeast Asia, if you look at kind of India, which is kind of here, a lot of these countries are still going through this, even though this kind of theory is almost, 50, 60, 70 years old now. It still works. However, the world's not that simple, is it? If I say to a kid, you work hard, you're going to get an A star. That's not always true, is it? We know that. So there is an alternative model, which we call the Frank's model, which is about dependency. So we'll jump into that now, and we'll have a look at how it's different and how it challenges this logic. Okay? See you in a second. All right, so now let's look at a counter-argument in the form of Frank's dependency theory. Now remember, dependency means one thing relies on another thing. The students are dependent on the teacher. So it kind of alludes to this idea of power. Where does power lie and where does it not lie? And so Rostow says that the global economy, which I've kind of used as a circle here, so this is a global economy, it has a periphery, edge, and it has a core. Now, at the core, you find a much higher concentration of economic activity, okay, of economic development, okay? And in terms of the global economy, the periphery is where we find much less economic activity. So these are two key words that you really need to be comfortable with: core and periphery. And so we're starting to see where this idea of dependency might come from. Where is the power? So at the core of the global economy is your superpower. Now, superpowers change over time, but currently it is the USA. But inside this core is not just our superpower. We'll have countries like the UK, like Japan, like France, etc. Okay? These are the real key core countries controlling the global economy, according to Frank. Now, on the outskirts, we have countries like Chad, in Central Africa, Malawi, in Sub-Saharan Africa, maybe Myanmar, in Southeast Asia, okay? So we have this idea of countries where there's not much economic activity, they don't have much wealth, whilst the core kind of holds it all central. Sometimes, not always, we have a semi-periphery. So if you're thinking about your language from your GCSEs, you've got developing, emerging, and developed. Okay, well, so how does this happen? We didn't just wake up one day and suddenly these countries are rich and these countries are poor. No, it's developed over many, many years and through what Frank would say was a intentional system. But what is that system? So, Rostow would argue that there is a flow. Now remember, flow means to move from one place to another. Okay, there is a flow of resources from the periphery into the core. Now, what is a resource? Now remember, a resource is a naturally occurring material that humans can't really make, but is valuable to them. Okay, so the example I'm going to use, and it kind of is a bit dated now because you can make diamonds, but we're going to use diamonds. Throughout human history, diamonds have been dug up in the ground all over the world, particularly Africa and South Africa are famous for it. Okay, but raw diamonds nobody wants. You have to process a raw diamond. So here is an image of a raw diamond. Okay, it's cool, but it's not exactly jewelry, is it? You wouldn't want to walk around with that on your neck. And so what happens is the core countries will buy these resources, okay, or sometimes they will colonize them and they will just take them and they will process them. Because they're advanced economies, they have industrial processes. How do you cut a diamond? A diamond is the world's hardest substance. How do you cut the world's hardest substance? The answer is you use a diamond sword blade to cut the diamond. Those are expensive, okay, highly skilled, large amounts of money needed to do that. So in come the raw diamonds, and then what happens is out of the core flows goods. So that diamond is now a diamond ring, okay? And we all know that everybody wants diamonds, okay? Look at the product. Yep, it's gone from quite an ugly thing to something that has huge amounts of demand. And so these raw materials will flow into the semi-periphery. Someone gets married in Chad who's got money, and someone from Chad is literally buying back Chad's resources at 10 times the price. That small little diamond that was rough cut that they sold for $300 is now worth $50,000, okay? And as a result, even the few pieces of money that are in the periphery, they are hoovered up and they are absorbed by the core. And it's this relationship, this dependency that Frank believed created this global inequality, okay? Where periphery nations have their resources absorbed, the core nations process them and sell them back to the periphery at huge profits. And so if we just before I kind of finish, Frank, if we look through history, talked about two examples of kind of how this relationship took place. The first was colonization. Here is an image of James Cook discovering, if you will, in brackets, discovering Australia. And then they kind of take the resources from there, often through violence and through superior military. And then the more modern way this is done, through neo-colonialization, which is kind of transnational corporations doing it. Here's an example, being a McDonald's. I think McDonald's operates in over 100 countries now. And all that profit goes back to America. Every time someone in Vietnam walks into a McDonald's and buys it, a percentage of that profit goes to the core, okay? And that's really it. this is the kind of economic system that Rostow talked about, okay? You have your core and your periphery. Okay, I hope that helps. We'll jump into an exam question and we'll look at how it works in that sense. Let's look at a question from the May 2020 EdXLB paper and see how we can apply what we've learned to it. So here is our question. Label the traditional stage of Rostow's modernization, figure 4. So very easy, it's a label question. They've even told you what you're looking for. This is really why we're here. Explain how Rostow's modernization theory can be used to understand how countries develop over time. I'm gonna bug the question. Explain. Okay, so there needs to be some depth here. Rostow's modernization theory. Countries develop time. Okay, so basically it's saying how can we use this to explain why countries are able to move from developing to developed. We look and see it's the marks. Now I'm going to come on to that because this one's a little bit confusing as into how we get those, but it's points-based marking. So here we go. This is quickly what you'd get in the exam. You'd write traditional society, you'd get your first mark. Now your second stage. So award 1 mark for an explanation as to the level of development, a stage of Rostow's model, and a further 2 marks for explanation of subsequent stages. So you need to do more than just name the stages that come afterwards. And you need to be able to say what the traditional society stage is as well. So you're not going to get a mark for saying traditional society. Okay? You might want to pause the video and read these 2 examples. You can see it's point-based marking. So every time that you say something valid, basically through using key language like industrialization or tier 2 language like rapid, you're going to get the mark. It's not just at the end of every sentence. It's, look, here's a comma, here's a comma. It's after you give some sort of actual academic knowledge. So this is roughly the question I would traditionally go with the 3-mark question. 1 blank is, I'm going to go characteristic because as a result, but I'm not actually going to get a mark from the points. I'm actually going to have to treat this almost like a 4-mark question. Okay, so let's see what I mean by that. So, one characteristic is that countries begin as a traditional society. Usually I'd get a mark for saying traditional society, but because they've already really told me that, and I've already got a mark for saying traditional society on the graph, I'm probably not going to get a mark here. So, I need to be careful because they rely on subsistence agriculture. Now that is actually telling me what the traditional society is really like. That's going to get me a mark. As a result, they invest in technology to prepare for pre-takeoff. Now, 2nd mark is probably going to be gained by saying invest in technology. Could maybe be a little bit clearer and say they invest in infrastructure such as roads and the national grid. That could work. But yeah, that's probably enough to give me my 2nd mark. So I've still got 2 marks to get. This means that to rapid industrialization, I should say this leads to rapid industrialization and an increased investment. Now, industrialization, increased investment, yeah, that's enough for a mark. Ending up with them reaching high mass consumption. And because I named that last stage, I reckon I've got enough for my 3rd mark there. So we've got a mark here, and maybe even 2 marks here. Again, of course, it's capped at 3, so we can't get that. Okay, so if we can move this on, what I've done here is I've highlighted the kind of key language, like tier 2 and tier 3 language. Tier 2 language is academic language like rapid and increased. And tier 3 is that geography specific language. So we see here traditional society, subsistence agriculture, invest, technology, takeoff, industrialization, investment, high mass consumption. That is a lean, that is a shredded paragraph. There is no fat on that. Okay, there is no wastage. Everything is either connectives, which allow increase my structure, or key geographical language. Okay, and that is how you quickly pack your paragraph full of information that will allow you to get access that 100%. Okay, guys, I hope that helps. Leave a comment in the section below if you want any advice or any feedback, or you want to submit some of your own versions of this. and like and subscribe for future videos.